Oh. Maybe tomorrow. You know what? Could probably wait. All right, let's see what we got here. Ha! Just not in the mode. Wait, isn't that a good thing? Me. Fasting autophagy, mTOR. Intermittent time, restricted feed. Oh. Are we live? Give me 1 sec. All right. Well, you got a little insight into my pregame routine, but that's cool. That's cool. What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic manner. You know, I was thinking, which is always dangerous, about this fasting experimentation I've done over the past year and beyond. Triggered a nice little memory of a study that I wanted to revisit, a study back in fall of 2019. This was an animal study that looked into the impacts of dietary restriction or calorie restriction when applied at different phases of these furry little creatures' lives. And it got me thinking, when is the right time to start a fasting protocol or fasting lifestyle or any fasting strategy? I mean, is it now? Is it yesterday? Is it tomorrow? I don't know. But if there are any caveats that play a role in the impact of the protocol, I want to know about it. I mean, I know like times you probably shouldn't be fasting, you know, during those first 20 or so years of life where you are in a massive growth phase. That's one of them. Another is if you are harboring and growing another human being inside of you. Probably not a good idea. But for like the rest of the time, what stage in your life should you be thinking about implementing this? First things first, dietary/calorie restriction is not the same as fasting. Some definitions. Dietary restriction and calorie restriction, DRCR, is essentially a chronic restriction of energy, otherwise known as calories, over an extended period of time. This is taking an organism that typically needs 2,000 calories a day and consistently over a long extended period of time giving it 1,800 or 1,600, something like that. DR and CR have shown to be life and health extending in many animal models and has also shown benefits in human research to the extent that it could be properly studied. I mean, there are some things you can't do to humans. I know people would want to do them, but you just can't. Now, dietary fasting, although there are several different strategies here, is essentially the willing abstinence of some or all food over a period of time. This could be a prolonged fast, which is typically, 36 hours and above. This could be intermittent fasting, which is something like alternate day fasting, eating every other day, or something like the 5 and 2 protocol, where you eat normally 5 days a week and you fast 2 days a week. And then you have time restricted feeding, which is where most people fit. And that is your feeding protocol over a 24-hour period. So a lot of people follow the 16-8 protocol. You fast 16 hours a day, you eat 8 hours a day, you dance every hour of the day. Or not. Moving on. So as you can see, dietary and calorie restriction and fasting are two very different things. And that doesn't mean they can't or shouldn't be used together, which you can check out this video up here to see how you can leverage them both, and they both make a very big impact. They're just different. And now we know. And now we can move on. And in my opinion, something like calorie restriction just seems a lot harder. I mean, like, eating less for ever just doesn't seem like any fun. And even though it shows solid results on animal models in terms of longevity, you gotta believe that it's pretty low on the sustainability index. That's why you see all of these fad, highly restrictive diets fail. It's all about sustainability. Enter fasting, stage left. Stage right? I always mess this up, and I don't know why I keep using the phrase. Fasting. So, interestingly enough, research has shown that following a fasting protocol can, and many times does, mimic a lot of the beneficial effects that come with calorie restriction. I like what I'm hearing. Go on. Without restricting food. I'm liking it a lot. Only the window in which you consume that food. I love you, fasting. Activating a lot of the underlying cellular mechanisms and longevity pathway. Oh my God, so much easier. So even though this study that we're about to go through focuses on dietary and calorie restriction, and in the study they say DR, but they really mean CR, calorie restriction. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. So even though it focuses on dietary and calorie restriction, I can't help but wonder if the same applies to fasting. Let's look at the research. P.S. This is a study in mice, not humans, mice. I like making this clear when I go through this stuff. 4 legs about this big, probably running around my New York City apartment here somewhere. Maybe we'll get them to do an intro cameo. Anyway, study in mice, let's dig in. So the objectives of this research was to look into how calorie restriction implemented at later years in the organism's life makes an impact on their 1, lifespan, and 2, health span. And if you don't know what health span is essentially the years that an organism is truly healthy, disease-free, doing everything that they wish and could ever dream of throughout their life. It's your healthy years. So that's what they were looking for. Let's talk about the methods a little bit. Researchers took an initial population of 800 mice. And for the first 3 weeks, they ate and were fed normally. This was during their growth period, basically teenagers. At that 3-month period, they split the mice into 2 groups. An ad libitum group, which continued to eat as they wished and pleased, and a calorie restriction group that, as you could have guessed, was restricted calories in their diet. The 2 groups of mice ate this way for the next 21 months, or until they were 2 years old. I wonder if the terrible 2s happen with mice too. Or is that like the terrible 2 weeks? Might be next video. And at this point, at the 24-month point, each group was divided once again. So first, looking at the ad libitum group. The 400 mice in this group were split into 2 additional groups of about 200 mice each, one continuing the ad libitum ways of eating and not changing anything, the other, at this extended period in their life, going to a calorie restricted diet. And then if we look at that initial group of calorie restricted mice, that group of 400 was split into 2 additional subgroups as well. One that continues the calorie restrictions, standard procedure, and the other, and these mice might have been like the happiest mice in the world, were given access to ad libitum food from there on out. Let's recap. After 24 months, we essentially have 4 groups of mice left. One group that is still all calorie restricted throughout their life, one group that's been able to eat ad libitum throughout their life, one group that was calorie restricted for 24 months and then just recently got to eat ad libitum, and the last group that was eaten ad libitum for 24 months and now they're stuck on this calorie restricted diet. 4 groups, about 200 mice each. You know, a couple bit the dust, RIP, little guys. So that's where we're at. At this point, 2 months after the final split into the 4 groups, tissue samples of liver cells, white adipose tissue, white fat cells, brown adipose tissue, brown fat cells, were collected and analyzed to see how this dietary change played a role in the mice's metabolic health. Friendly reminder, in mice, not humans, mice. I wonder what they found. The results. As you could have guessed, the mice that followed the dietary calorie restriction throughout the whole course of their life lived the longest and healthiest lives. And the mice that followed the ad libitum way of eating for the entire course of their life had the shortest, unhealthiest lives. Those were the easy guesses. Now, here is where it gets juicy. The mice that followed a dietary and calorie restriction for the first 24 months and then moved to ad libitum way of eating saw a rapid and steep increase in mortality. That's a little intense. What about those mice that found the healthy bandwagon and went on the calorie restriction after 24 months? Well, the mice that went from ad libitum for the first 24 months to the dietary calorie restriction saw a ever so slight decrease in mortality rate, but that mortality rate still remained a lot higher than those chronically dietary restricted and calorie restricted mice. You know, those lifers. Now, is there anything in those tissue samples collected, 2 months after the last dietary change for each of the respective groups that could explain all this? Well, it calls for a, finger pointing. What was that movie? I'm pointing my fingers, I'm pointing my fingers, I'm pointing my fingers at you. It's the Mick Jagger SNL skit, yeah. With Jimmy Fallon in the mirror. You missed it? Watch it here. Anyway, researchers found that the gene activity in the liver quickly adapted when the mice were transferred to the restrictive diet. However, when it comes to the adipose, aka the fat tissue, researchers saw what they called a memory effect in the tissue of older animals. Although these mice who ate ad libitum their entire life and switched to dietary restriction later in life saw an increase in weight loss, the gene activity in their fat tissues stayed pretty much the same as their ad libitum mice brethren and sisterin. For some reason, the dietary/calorie restriction did not have an impact on these white and brown adipose tissue. Now, I know what you're thinking. Now, what if these mice who made this switch later in life, what if they just didn't have enough time? What if their cells just needed a little more time to ramp up all the cellular goodness that was going to make the shift to metabolic health? Well, here's what the research did to investigate this very question. They took a new group of mice and made the switch to dietary restriction from ad libitum feeding at the 12-week mark instead of the 24-month mark. The same tissue sampling was done, and surprisingly, there was a complete transcriptional change across all 3 tissue types: the liver, the white adipose, and the brown adipose. Genes that were resistant to the switch after 24 months in the older mice were completely and utterly tolerant and sensitive in this younger group. This right here had the researchers suggesting that adipose tissue is highly responsive to calorie restriction in young mice. But this flexibility decreases with age, especially in white adipose tissue. So why might all this matter to you and to your health? Well, good question. Once we navigate past the fact that rats are not humans, although some humans are rats, we can look into the potential importance of these findings. First, the key points to note. The mice in this study were subject to calorie restricting, eating less calories every single day for a long period of time. Us humans, we don't like doing that very much. And if we do it, we can't really sustain it, and we do it every once in a while to lose 3 pounds. However, with recent research, like I said in the beginning of the video, we're finding that following some sort of fasting protocol has the potential to mimic a lot of the longevity and lifespan increasing effects of calorie restriction. So the question for us fasting humans out there is, do the potential benefits of starting some sort of fasting protocol wear off as we get to the later years in life? And unfortunately, that's not a question that this study that we just went over answered. And I think you knew that. But here are my non-scientific, non-medical professional thoughts on the question. If you are a full-grown adult that is not growing another human inside them, and you have a vested interest in your longevity, aka living the longest and healthiest life possible, doing exactly what you want and desire to the very, very end, then today would probably be you know what? Scratch that. Today would probably be a perfect day for you to step back and start observing your eating habits and looking at points to implement potential change. What type of change? It could be something like chronic calorie restriction, but that gets old fast. However, something like time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting could and probably is something to look at. As you can see from the research that we just went over, there is a lot that is going on at the cellular level when we make dietary changes. That is where the real beneficial, impactful stuff is actually happening. The things we notice, like shedding a couple of pounds, having more energy, a better mood, clearer skin, is just a byproduct of all that cellular level goodness. And like always, the choice is all yours. Is this a pimple? Mother.